you'll encounter a lot of obstacles, and in the case of the auditioning process, there'll be a lot of thank you very much for coming in, and a lot of that stuff, and you got to work your way through it,
Andy, you were born in Havana, Cuba.
Yes, I was.
Just before the Cuban Revolution kicked off.
Well, I was born in '56, so it was, the revolution was, well, it started around '57 or so, but Castro came into power '58, '59, New Year's Eve, actually.
And you stayed in Cuba until the age of 5. What were your
2.5 years under the Castro regime, yeah.
What were your memories of that time?
There was a fervor of transformation and propaganda, and the indoctrination process started very early on. Even if you weren't in school, you were receiving the energy. I remember my mother tells me that my father came home one day and she said, we need to leave the country. And my father was kind of going, and I know, but let's see what happens. And she says, look at your son. He says, I came home, your son was marching today, and he was humming the Internationale, which is the communist sort of theme song, And so, my family just, they wanted to get us out of there,
Well, your family, like thousands of other Cubans, fled for the United States.
Yes.
Was that a tough time?
Well, for me, initially it wasn't a thing where I felt I was going to be there. It's like I thought it was just like a vacation, It wasn't presented as though we were moving there for good. I think the hope of all the exiles that left was to return, It was a temporary thing. No one felt that he could sustain that kind of dogma that he was putting together. And we all lived in a one-bedroom apartment, 6 of us, and it was like, it was an adventure. So I had a great upbringing, really, in America, and I grew up in a predominantly small exile community and a Jewish American community in Miami Beach. And I had a great childhood, and I was fortunate that my parents, had the courage to start over from scratch, and bring us out, because if that wouldn't have happened, I wouldn't be talking to you right now.
Well, after almost 50 years, Fidel Castro handed over power to his brother in 2008. Do you think that Cuba has changed under Raul Castro?
No.
No reforms?
No. It's all smoke and mirrors. It continues to be a, centralized dictatorship, run by a family, really, 2 brothers. It's like a mafia, So the Don retires, and then the young Corleone takes over.
Do you miss Cuba?
Of course, yeah, of course.
Would you go back?
I go back every day. Yeah. No, definitely, but not under that regime. I really have no interest. Certainly, of course, I'd like to go back, and I'm connected culturally and to the country in a very profound way, but I really have no interest in supporting them, so therefore the tragedy of exile, they say, is exile. But the thing is that I think that people who have left their country like that for political reasons, it's like impossible love, you can love her but you can't be with her.
Well, Andy, you are the first actor in your family. How did they feel about you entering this world?
Well, it was completely foreign to them. They were very concerned, I'm sure, because they had no concept of how even an actor made a living,
What drew you to this career?
I was pretty much a young athlete, so I was preoccupied with organized sports most of my life until my 12th senior year in high school, and I got an illness and I wasn't able to do any sports that whole year. And I took an acting class, and again, it was very rewarding, and the teacher was very encouraging. And so I started studying after that, and I just kind of, and I committed to it. And at that same time, I had just seen, shortly thereafter, The Godfather Part 1. And when I saw that movie, it solidified, privately, I said, I want to do that with my life. I want to be in a movie like that, Even Brando auditioned for the film in disguise, because the studio did not want Brando in the film.
Got him?
Yeah, I got him.
You are! Will you stop it? Take him. 2.
You moved to Hollywood in 1978. It was after something like 10 years of bit roles that you finally landed the position in The Untouchables.
Yes. Yeah, it took me a while just to get an agent, you know. And without an agent in Los Angeles, you really have very little opportunities. And in those days, the opportunities weren't that many. There was no cable television. There was just 3 networks and about 5 studios. So without an agent, I couldn't get the opportunities to audition. But, you know, slowly I kind of just kept making my way, and I finally got an agent that was very helpful, and she was able to get me out on some auditions, and I landed a couple films prior to The Untouchables, and one in particular that they saw, and they asked me to, it was the last movie that Hal Ashby did called 8 Million Ways to Die. And they saw me in that film, and they called me in to play the killer in the film, Frank Nitti, which was Capone's killer, because the character I played in that other movie was not a good, you know, he was a bad guy.
But it was that role in The Untouchables that really put you out there. People finally knew who Andy Garcia was.
Yeah, well, the thing was that it was a very successful film. You know, whenever you're in a movie that was successful around the world, then all of a sudden you somehow, you know, there's some, you know, your marketing value goes up, therefore your opportunities as an actor go up.
You worked with director Ridley Scott in Black Rain with Michael Douglas?
With Mike Douglas, yeah.
Yeah. What was that like?
Oh, lovely. I mean, Ridley is one, you know, from very early on, I was interested not only in being an actor, but being a filmmaker, you know. So I had these opportunities that I got with great filmmakers, starting from Hal Ashby and then De Palma and then Ridley Scott and so on and so forth. And so it was a great opportunity to watch Ridley work, you know, and what his particular design for this movie was. And I learned a lot from him. You know, I was always kind of looking over his shoulder. And then I was, you know, I had the blessing of working with Michael Douglas, who, if you ever want to be in the trenches with somebody, you know, there's a couple guys that I would turn to, and immediately would be Michael Douglas and Jeff Bridges, you know.
Vincenzo. Grazie, caro.
Don Corleone.
Don Vincenzo Corleone.
Francis Ford Coppola. Mm-hmm. He saw you and he thought he wanted you in
I'm not so
Godfather
sure about that.
No?
No, that's not the way it worked at all, actually. I was doing a movie for Paramount called Internal Affairs, and produced by Frank Mancuso Jr. And Frank Sr., who's at the head of the studio, came to me at lunch one day, and he said, "What are you doing in September?" This was like in May. He said, "What are you doing in September? Because I want to talk to Francis. I want you to be, you know, play this character of Vincent Corleone." And it was already rumored what it was, and they were looking for a young man. The script wasn't really released, but everybody knew they were looking for the young guy to be the young Corleone. So I said to him, "Well, I'll check my schedule. I'll get back to you." The thing was that if you know about the Godfather history, in Godfather 1, the studio suggested all these people to play the brothers, including Michael Corleone, which was the lead. And even Brando they didn't want Brando in the movie. Even Brando auditioned for the film in disguise, because the studio did not want Brando in the film. So, you know, the people that the studio would suggest to Francis, from Francis' point of view, which was a ludicrous suggestion, you know. So the fact that I was being suggested by the studio already, I thought, you know, for me it was honored, but for Francis it was like, okay, who do they have now? I met Francis once, so we just had a meeting, and then I was the last person to screen test on a Friday, and they gave me the part on Saturday, and we started rehearsal on Monday. So
That must have been a dream come true for someone who was inspired by the Godfather.
It was an extraordinary thing, you know. That's obviously you have to give it up to, you know, the people who gave you the fortitude to pursue that dream, you know, and that all of a sudden you find yourself in sort of facing your own sort of imaginary destiny that you thought you might you know, like your dream all of a sudden became a reality.
And I guess the Oscar nomination must have just topped it off.
Well, you know, that's the greatest honor that an actor can have is when your peers, you know, signal out your work.
Okay, tell me about Benedict.
That guy's a machine.
Good afternoon, Mr. Benedict.
He arrives at the Bellagio every day at 2 p.m. Same car, same driver.
All right, Tommy, how's the baby?
Very well, thank you. Remembers every valet's name on the way in. Not bad for a guy worth $750 million.
2001, you joined the modern-day Rat Pack, starring in Ocean's.
Well, I wasn't
11.
technically a member of the Rat Pack.
No, you weren't, but you were
was
part of the
atta-
gang. You were on set with George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon.
Yes,
Julia
I
Roberts.
was.
What was that like?
Oh, they're wonderful people, you know, really, you know, good eggs, as they say, you know. They're generous and very easygoing and warm-hearted. It was a great, the entire cast, and Don Cheadle, Matt Damon, and Bernie Mac, and God bless his soul. You know, the whole gang, you know, was fantastic. I was surprised they called me back because they did 2 more, and my character really didn't have to play into them, but I guess they...
So you were part of the gang.
Eventually I became part of the gang, exactly.
Will there be an Ocean's 14?
I don't think so.
No.
No, I don't think so.
And if this year you start in For Greater Glory, which is based on the true story about Mexico's fight for religious freedom, you play the general that led the rebellion. What is it like playing historical figures?
You try to gather as much information that you can about the real character, and you try to find that Gorosieta inside of you, you know? Because ultimately you have to find the sort of the emotional parallels in your life that could, the same passions that he had, the same vulnerabilities that he might have had.
I can only presume, though, that you would put yourself under a great deal of pressure because you are playing somebody who has lived.
Yeah, you know, I don't feel pressure when I act.
No?
No, it's so invigorating for me. I feel honored when I'm acting, but I don't feel pressure. Pressure is not healthy for the acting process, you know. Relaxation is your friend, and spontaneity, and what you can do is prepare yourself with all the homework and everything, and prepare the character so you can completely, you know, be in the moment at the time and let things manifest themselves, you know, depending on what you're feeling around. And I learned very early on about, because I did a lot of improvisational theater, that I realized that it's okay to fall on your face. But what's important is that you fall forward, because you always when you get up, you're at least a step ahead of where you were before. My only concern is to make a great film, you know. It's a lot of things you can't control, you know, advertising, commerciality, you know, whether a studio spends money on the movie to promote it or not. And what's most important to me is that a great movie exists. It's a very addicting sport. You know?
Is it really?
Yeah, it's a jealous mistress.